Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and we've got a really fun afternoon for you. We are going to be talking about wisdom and aging. Trish Chilton is here with us today. She is with the University of Arizona's Department of Psychology. I think you're really going to love what she has to share with you. She is a graduate student pursuing her PhD in the social psychology program. She received her degree in gerontology from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, where she studied person-centered care methods and intergenerational communication. Post-graduation, Trish co-created a digital memory platform utilizing a virtual mind for use in a reminiscence therapy and person-centered care. She recently received her master's in psychology at the University of Arizona, where she continues her research in education and wisdom, aging, and intergenerational relationships. Wow. So it's really neat. I have met with Trish. We have enjoyed sharing all about wisdom and aging. And so I'm so glad that she's here with us today. So welcome, Trish.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And yeah, I have to joke, I'm like a little discombobulated because I put in the address to come here. It took me far out and I still don't know my way around Tucson, even though I should. So part of wisdom is dealing with uncertainty and difficult situations. And I don't know if I was so wise when I was cussing in my truck, but that's what happened. But here I am anyway. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for being here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about wisdom today. And it's pretty funny because no one really knows what it is, but we kind of do know what it is. It's one of those fuzzy topics that researchers have just now started to look into over the past 20 or 30 years, but we know it's something that's very important for our well-being. So a little bit about me. I hail from North Carolina. You might hear the accent sometimes. These are my 4 kids, and I was brought here to Tucson by my husband, who is faculty at the U of A. And as Maya said, I have a background in gerontology, and I'm interested in aging and wisdom development and intergenerational relationships. So the title of today is Wisdom. What is it? How do we get it? And who has it? Disclaimer right off the bat, the more I study wisdom, the more I'm convinced that many of us, including myself, I'm learning. It's a developmental process. So everything that I say today, take it with a grain of salt. It's not written in stone. It's fluid. It's individual. It's cultural. So I'm just here to offer you ideas. What are we going to do today? So we're going to kind of talk about who is wise. Who do we think is wise? I'm going to go through the evolution of wisdom in a historical and cultural context. We're going to just touch on something called the grandmother hypothesis. And fellas, don't be sad that it's not grandparent, because grandfathers certainly are included in that. But this has something specifically to do with the female body parts. So. And then we're going to look at a scientific view on wisdom. What are the characteristics found in the empirical literature, the neurobiology of wisdom? Where is it in our brain? And how is it developed? And then I'll just touch on a few studies on aging and wisdom. Okay. So before we do that, I have a little interactive here. Just from your guys' perspective, I wanted to get some ideas about who you think is wise and characteristics of wisdom. It can be a famous person, someone that you know personally, someone who's no longer alive. I just want to see, let's just kind of explore where we are as far as this. So you guys can call it out, raise your hand, whatever. We can start with who. Who do you think in your life that you've known as wise? or a famous person.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Pardon?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil.
Are you talking about people in our own life or just anybody out there?
Anyone out there?
Okay, Buddha.
Okay. Neil
deGrasse, the astronomer.
Oh, yeah, okay. Is that right?
Tyson.
Close. Did-
deGrasse.
No,
No, that's good.
Tyson.
Tyson. Tyson.
Oh.
Like Tyson Farms.
Neil Tyson.
Tyson.
Close enough. Maybe hard to draw a star. He's an astronomer.
Yeah.
I'm not my field, sorry.
The Buddha.
The Buddha. Yes. Anyone else?
Jesus.
Jesus.
I saw hands.
Mahatma Gandhi.
I'm not going to try to spell it.
Just put Gandhi.
Just put Gandhi. I butchered the first one, so yes.
I was thinking Solomon, but because he was given that.
Yeah.
But I mean, but then again, where did the wisdom go when he got stood up when he's comfortable with that?
Exactly. So,
Um,
but he's a representative of wisdom
Yes.
in our,
that's a nice.
Okay. King Solomon.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I was going much lower than that, but I was thinking like Maya Angelou. I think she was
Oh, yeah.
a person.
Maya Angelou.
Stephen Hawking?
Stephen Hawking. Yep. Okay.
Stephen Colbert and the Stephen
The humor part of wisdom, Stephen Colbert. He is very, very smart. I think that's.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Do you want to switch over to characteristics? That might be a little easier.
Yeah. I don't think you can.
Okay. So,
Statesman.
what are characteristics of wisdom?
Flexibility.
Visionary.
Very good listener.
Good listener. Very good listener. So flexibility, visionary, good listener,
Good communicator.
Yeah.
good communicator,
Endurance.
endurance. You know?
Well, some of them, not all of them, I would say are calm. They're calm.
Hmm.
You know, they're not, they don't get excited about things. That doesn't mean they're not studying them, but they're calm.
Very nice. Very good. Yep.
Curious.
Curious.
You know.
No.
So these, and you can continue to think of them in your mind as we go along. Maybe some might pop up. But I always do this. I've given this talk a few times, and it's interesting because as I go along and I talk about the literature and what's been done, and and also just the historical aspect of wisdom, it's nice to look up on the board and see how many match and see the people that match. So. That we all have kind of a common idea of what wisdom is, but it's a very cultural and individualistic thing as well. Okay. All right, so yeah, here are some that are cited in the literature. There's King Solomon, and we also have a young person over there, Greta Thunberg, the climate change activist. So wisdom is not only for older adults, it is found in younger people too. But the reason that I study wisdom and aging is because the literature, and I personally believe there's a strong correlation between wisdom and aging. because of our life experience. We just simply have had more of it, hopefully learn more about it. Can everyone see? Okay, so right now we're going to go through the evolution of wisdom. So trying to make sense out of life through wisdom, and also for our generational survival of our species. So first of all, the historical context. When we talk about the history of wisdom and how far back it goes in writing, we can first find it really in East Asia, about 551 BC in Confucius, and he talked about empathy, reciprocal concern, respect, obligation to family, familial ties. We have the Buddha up there. That's 5th or 6th century Nepal. And we have kindness, patience, which kind of could go with calm, generosity, and compassion. Next, we go into Socrates. And Socrates, many of you probably know, really felt strongly that particularly politicians and artists thought that they were wise, but he said, well, you're just not, and neither am I, because wisdom is humility, and not many are wise, including me. And that was actually written by his disciple Plato, who wrote the book, wrote his biography, Plato. Aristotle was a disciple of Plato, and he moved more into the theoretical and practical knowledge side of wisdom, which we see some of those up there. And being like good communication, flexibility. Theoretical represented the science of wisdom, and practical knowledge was more like your intuition. And then I just threw Athena up there. She's the Greek goddess of wisdom and reason. And I never knew why an owl represented wisdom. We see owls with wisdom. It's because there you see Athena's pet was an owl. She carried it around with her. So that's why we relate owls to wisdom. Little fun fact. And then we have Jesus, whom we have up there as well, who taught peace, compassion, and forgiveness. And all the way down through to modern day, we have these examples, the books of wisdom that many people look to in different traditions that are based off of some of these individuals' teachings. So this is kind of like moving through history, just to ground us in history where we're at. I just talked about the classical on the previous slide. Next comes the Middle Ages, and wisdom was predominantly dictated by political and religious influence. That was before the printing press, and not many regular people had a voice in wisdom. Then we move into the early modern age, so that's the Renaissance area. There's a rediscovery of classical philosophy, so the classical philosophy of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, including philosophy, literature, and art. And then we have the modern age, about 1750 to the present, what we call the industrial age, an influx, particularly in the past century, of science, technology, and most important for the study of wisdom is longevity. So for the past 120 years, we've been given a great gift in humanity, and that's the gift of longevity, about 25 to 30 years extra to live our lives. And we also have, coming out of Western society, we have the emergence of the Individualistic Society, which I'm going to go into more in a few slides. So talking about the different types of societies and the cultural aspect of wisdom, first I'm going to talk about collectivist societies. And these are indigenous societies, Asian and African societies. They're more interdependent. What really matters to them is the group, what the group dictates, and being a part of the group and the community. Especially in Asia, they have a very strong sense of honor, family honor. They're highly intergenerational, so you will see many families living together. We also see this in the Latinx communities, and there's a strong sense of group loyalty. So the way that people live in these collectivist societies really influences their understanding and development and exchange of wisdom, particularly intergenerationally. So I have an African proverb there: if the wise elders of the village don't teach the children, the village idiots will certainly do so. Then we move into the individualistic societies. This comes from Western traditions. It has influenced everything from how we treat our older adults to how we view science, how we do science, how we live in a community. So we think about America, for example, very, very independent. There's individual choice, personal freedoms, a sense of autonomy, and uniqueness. And this influences the way generations, intergenerational communities interact with one another. I know personally, for me, I would really love to see more interaction in the United States of young people and older people. And I was telling my dear friend here at breakfast that there's something called age segregation, right? And it's a real thing that exists. And age segregation is really a phenomenon of Western society, of individualistic societies. I personally don't think that human beings were built to live that way. I think that we were built to learn from our elders. That's just me. But there are some really positive things, even development of personal wisdom in these type of societies, like individual choice and personal freedom and having autonomy. So there's some give and take, I think, with that. And this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson: "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." Now we get to the grandmother hypothesis. The reason why this focuses on grandmother is because evolutionary biologists have this theory. It's not proven, but it's a theory that women ceased menses, went through menopause in order to, for the survival of the human species, because there needed to be someone who wasn't having babies, who could take care of tiny, tiny children while mom was having babies. So they theorized that we started menopause for that reason evolutionarily, in order to guarantee the survival of the species. And so, we can ask ourselves, why do we live 30, 40 years past menopause? I'm just starting mine now. So I'm a little bit older than the typical grad student. So I'm like, there is a reason why. And this, they theorize, is why. So that's why grandfather is not in there. But I would say that grandparent now, for taking care of, teaching, guiding, mentoring their grandchildren, is an extraordinarily very important part of grandparenting. If you're interested more in it, there's a woman named Kristen with a K, Hawkes, Hawkes. She has a PBS special on the grandmother hypothesis. So the evolutionary theory suggests that inclusive fitness, so that's basically when you're helping someone else, when you're part of a community, when you have purpose in mentoring and helping someone else, you're inclusively a part of it, and you're keeping yourself fit mentally, physically, by supportive social actions. And that actually, they propose, may counteract aging in later life. And there is an extended lifespan associated with pronounced intergenerational transfers, so having intergenerational relationships. The grandmother hypothesis has suggested there's an improvement of the daughter's reproductive fitness, and I would say even mentally and emotionally fitness, of having that support. And there's a transfer of knowledge to children through grandparenting, mothering, and back in the day, and several hundred or thousand years ago, that was through finding food and learning how to be in a group, pro-sociality. while the young mother cared for her infants. And that may have sealed our species evolution, as I just said. And these types of societies, of grandmother hypothesis are more found in collectivist societies, whereas individualistic societies that we just discussed may not live close to each other, may not have that connection that the collectivist societies do. So here's an example of Kristen Hawk's work. She did a lot of work with the Hadza tribe in East Africa, which they're still around. And the grandmother's job, they were very important to teach the grandchildren how to forage for food, how to cook that food, and how to be part of the community. And then there's a really interesting study done. It's a Finnish study on grandchild survival. So they took these researchers looked at birth records in the church records of this particular community between 1731 and 1890. And they just wanted to see if the grandmother lived close by or lived in, with the child and the grandchildren, what was the survival of the grandchildren like, especially back then when there was a high infancy rate. So they found that survival of toddler grandchildren increased 30% when maternal grandmothers were present, which is a pretty big percentage.
It's interesting that it's maternal grandmothers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the mother of the mother, right? And then grandmothers in poor health actually decreased childhood survival. And back then, I mean, you can think of many reasons why that probably was. But geographic distance mattered. So grandmothers who lived farther from their daughters, that did not have this benefit. It was only when they lived close by. But now we go into the modern era, and we can't certainly live close by, even though we may want to. Life happens, and we travel. Children move, grandchildren move, parents move. People, do many different things. So there's different ways that grandparents can interact through technology. There's Zoom, and there's actually an intergenerational habitation comeback. So there's a lot of home builders who are building mother-in-law suites and things like that, so that grandparents can come back and live with the family. There's an interesting study in 2009 that looked at over 1,500 kids ages 11 to 16. This was actually in England. And they found that the greater the grandparent involvement, there were fewer emotional issues with the children. And it was also associated, their involvement, with more pro-social behaviors of the children. So grandparenting, whether you live near or far, is very, very important. It's an incredible part of our human survival, of learning from your grandparents. So I like to take a little break and say, any questions, comments, or I can keep, yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting. I think another component, though, whether grandparenting is helpful, is how healthy is that grandparent, like emotionally helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could just say from personal experience that my mother, when she was living close, it was the opposite of helpful. It was better when she's away because she's just not emotionally. And so I think it depends on who that grandparent is. I mean, there's some that it's better if they're not around.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I was told to repeat. So the comment was sometimes the grandparent is, it's more beneficial to not have the grandparent around when that grandparent is not healthy, maybe mentally, emotionally, or otherwise, that it may actually do more harm than good. And I would completely agree. And I would say that it's really important to have surrogate grandparent figures in a child's life too, that are healthy emotionally, and mentally and otherwise, to help mentor children. So that connection.
Maybe the grandmother had a reason.
Maybe her grandmother
Not being helpful.
had a reason for not being helpful.
Yeah, I don't know the whole story. I'd like to know that.
My hearing is not good.
She said maybe your grandparent had a reason for not being helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just mentioning my specific situation just to give it color, but I don't necessarily need to speak to my personal situation.
What happens to a grandparent when they're ignored and left out? There's a whole lot of
Exactly.
dynamics that you're talking
You're right. What happens when the grandparent is ignored? That's why I mentioned the age segregation part too. There's a lot of ageism that goes on. And part of my personal goal and why I went back to school, what I want to do is teach. I don't really want to necessarily go into research, is to teach classes on the positive aspects of aging. That's why I study wisdom. Try to break down the barriers. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of stigma with aging.
But we have a whole undercurrent here in this country with a business, nursing homes, assisted, I mean, it's a huge business. And I know that I just bought a house from a lady who was literally dying in her own home of starvation. And had she been in assisted living, actually her daughter picked her up and moved her in for 5 years and then she died. She couldn't even care for herself anymore. She was starving. There's so many levels. It's not simplistic.
Yeah.
It's very, very complicated.
You're right. It is a complex, very difficult situation that our country should have been ready for because we saw it coming with longevity, but we simply didn't do what needed to be done.
And now, the 85 and 90-year-olds have 60, 60-year-old children
Yes.
who have to feed themselves. You know, there's so
I know.
much.
We could have a whole session on that. Yes.
I think even in this room, as I listened to the last three speakers, that there's a foundational disparity of ageism and how we age in America. And if we even, I remember becoming, 65 or whatever, and becoming invisible.
Yeah.
Where in my 20s, 30s, 40s, I was clearly a viable person as it relates to our society. What is important, what is accepted in our society. So I began to look at myself more deeply as I aged, and there became an epiphany of self-acceptance. I'm so happy to be where I am in life and have my health, because without that, I don't care how much money you have in the bank.
Wow. So I wish I could repeat all of that.
But
But
my grandmother's
that was a lot.
recipes,
Yeah.
I just know it in my head.
Self-awareness and yeah.
And a self-acceptance, even though
self-acceptance,
society wants to put you on, put you elsewhere and be.
So that's part of what I'm going to talk about with the wisdom is that that reflectivity. I'm just real quick. Sorry. Yeah.
I wanted to add a different situation that I have found myself in. Due to economics and having a house, that, when my mother died, it came to me unknowingly. And I have gathered my son, his wife, and her daughter, and my ex-husband, my son's father, and me, and now, miraculously, a new baby. 47 years old, she has a baby, watch out. She didn't know at first, because she was okay, and thought it was menopause.
Wow.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
And my son wasn't supposed to have babies either. He was told that his sperm were crappy. So here's this beautiful 5-month-old in our complex collective, and it's really amazing.
That's awesome.
I thought that'd be the other side of it.
Yeah.
Because I thought I'd end up in a nursing home, but now I'm happy.
That intergenerational. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I was just gonna say that I think that our society leans toward technology and science and discounts experience and age.
Yeah.
So, I've seen this with my daughter, she didn't want to hear about my experience for childbirth and so on and whatever, but she wanted to have a doula and a nursing expert and all these things, and it's like, really? And we've been doing this for how many, decades, millenniums, whatever. So I think that this society puts value on technology, science, and whatever you want to call it, and discounts age, experience, and wisdom.
Yeah. So I can repeat that. So this society really values technology and discounts age, the good things that come with age, like wisdom,
And experience.
and experience. So, all right, those are excellent. Do I have an hour? Oh, yes, sorry. Okay. Hi. Sorry about that. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the scientific view on wisdom. All I mean by that is researchers who have been like, I wonder what wisdom is. Let's find out. First, I'm going to talk about the characteristics that they found in the research and neurobiology, where it lives in our brain, and then the development of wisdom. Again, I'm just throwing this out here, food for thought. You can take it or leave it. So this is just what the researchers have found. So there's our little owl. According to research, wisdom is not intelligence. It has a lot more to do with morality and virtue, compassion, humility, reflection, especially that self-awareness, reflection, experience, practical knowledge, and our cognitive function, which are going to with neurobiology, and maybe personality. We don't know yet, but that's being looked at. So back to our slide, I just highlighted some of the adjectives or characteristics that we find going all the way back to Confucius that are actually part of the modern wisdom literature. All right, so now this is again through a westernized lens. Remember that wisdom is cultural, so this does not apply to all cultures. This is through a westernized lens because Westerners this is from Western style research. So a grad student named Vivian Clayton and her mentor James Beeren back in the early 80s, they were wondering, what is this wisdom thing? What is it exactly? So they did an entire research study, interviewing lots and lots of participants, and they boiled it down to 3 basic things. Well, it has to do with your I'm going to go through these each two. Cognitive, reflective, and affective domains. And I'm going to go into them. This is just a background of who started this whole research stuff. Then we have Monica Ardell, move forward to 2003. She's at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And she really liked that idea. But she said, I'm going to change affective, which means, emotion, to compassionate. And she created the very first valid wisdom measure that is the golden standard of wisdom research. Okay, so let's dig deeper into these. So for cognitive, when we talk about cognitive, we're talking about experience, life knowledge, the ability to reason and to kind of understand human nature in a way, have good judgment about different things that come up in life, pragmatism. And the compassionate part is pretty self-evident. We have the word calm up there on our list. Empathy, benevolence, being calm, having patience, and pro-social behaviors. And then finally, reflectivity. So self-awareness is actually up there. So insight, introspection, humility, like, okay, I realize that I don't know everything. I certainly don't. Self-reflection, self-understanding, self-awareness, and receptivity. So what we see from these is they do not stand alone. They are integrated, and it's a holistic attitude towards life. Now, this is according to Vivian Clayton and Monica Ardell. So for the cognitive, we have a meaningful understanding of our life experience. In compassion, we're able to put that into action, that life knowledge and good judgment. But Monica Ardell argues that reflectivity is kind of the foundation, it's the cornerstone of these 3 aspects. Without the ability to really sit down and think about your life and learn from your mistakes and have that introspection, insight, humility to understand what has happened to you in the first place and to put it in action, these other 2, cognitive and compassion, really can't stand alone. Reflectivity is really the cornerstone, according to Monica Ardell. So reflectivity, I'm going to read a really great definition because I can't memorize it, so I'm going to read it. And I found this in one of the papers by a fellow named Nick Westrate, who's at the University of Chicago. The motivation, reflectivity is the motivation and ability to reflect deeply, complexly, and non-defensively on one's own life experiences and other people's life experiences in order to generate a more realistic and nuanced view of oneself and life in general. It's a mouthful, but what they're saying is really it's the ability to look back on your life and not just a chronological list like, okay, these years I went to school, I went to college, I got married. It's about looking at your life experiences, positive and negative, which we call autobiographical reasoning, to find meaning making and hopefully personal growth. So there's a process called exploratory processing. These usually stem from fundamental life events. They can be normative, which means the normal things people go through life, getting married, getting a job, having kids, or non-normative, the things that just happen to us, like a sudden death or divorce or losing your job, things that you're not expecting to happen. Those are the fundamental life events. From those then, in being reflective, hopefully we glean life lessons and insights, and then are self-aware and have self-understanding. We can then transfer hopefully to others. Okay, this is kind of like a weird, complicated slide, but in all of this talk about, well, what is wisdom? What is it really? And all of these different researchers coming up with different things, a couple of researchers said, we just need to come together and try to come up with like one understanding of it, one conceptual model of what wisdom is. So there was a survey that was sent out to, and I'm going to read here, to professionals in social and personality psychology, judgment and decision-making, cognitive and moral sciences from Asia, North and South America, Europe, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, and the Caribbean. So the survey was sent out to all of these professionals, and when it came back and filtered through, this is what they came up with. The perspectival metacognition view on wisdom. This is a common wisdom model. It's not really used, but I thought it was a good example of trying to put together the conceptual idea that we can use of wisdom. So the PMC operates at a level above cognition, calling upon a set of beliefs, morals, regulation, adaptability, and social responsibility. So it represents a balance of viewpoints, that cognitive humility, like I don't know everything, there's still lots for me to learn, being able to adapt to difficult situations like me getting lost and being late, being able to see multiple perspectives, like, you know, from different viewpoints, even if you don't agree, and being able just to listen. And it's required for implementation of abstract and moral concepts. It allows you to see through illusion and self-deception. And it also assists in survival-oriented coordination and long-term planning. I think that has a lot to do with being able to manage the adversity in our lives well. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to move past this one and then we can do at the end. Okay. All right, so now the neurobiology of wisdom. So there's a researcher at University of California, San Diego. His name is Dilip Jeste. And Dr. Jeste is a geriatric psychiatrist, and he was very, very interested. He's in what wisdom is and how it may buffer or protect aging. And so he did a lot of fMRI studies and proposed different situations to the participants that required wise decision making. And he looked at their brain to see which part was activated. So what he found was, not surprisingly, the executive part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, and there's different sections to the prefrontal cortex, but overall we could say the entire prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for social decision-making, self-reflection, impulse control, tolerance, dealing with uncertainty, and executive function, which we find here. And then the amygdala, which the amygdala controls our emotions, either fear or happiness. It can be good or bad. So this has to do with our social cooperation, our immediate rewards, and emotional response. And how many of you have heard of Phineas Gage? Okay, for those who haven't, this is a really great example of why the prefrontal cortex is so important for wisdom. So Phineas Gage lived in the mid-1800s, and he was in his young 20s, and he worked for the railroad in the northeastern United States. And he was a very congenial man. Everybody loved him. He was a great foreman. People spoke very highly of him. He made great decisions. But one day, and you see in his hand, he has an iron bar. It's called a tapping iron. And what they did for the railroads to blow up certain portions of rock to put the railroads down, they would drill a hole in the rock and pour gunpowder in there. And he would use his tapping iron to tap it down, light it, and explode the rock. So they put the powder in, and he was tapping it. But as he was tapping it, and by the way, that rod is, I can't remember how long it is, but it's like a javelin, and the top is very pointed. And someone called his name, and he looked behind him, and he hit the rock. A spark went off, and the javelin, the rod went straight up right there, all the way out of his skull, completely out of his skull. And so basically left a hole in his prefrontal cortex. He was walking around, he was talking after the accident, take me to the doctor, put him in the buggy, took him to the doctor. He had a long recovery. He didn't live very, very long after that. Maybe, I can't remember, like less than 10 years. But everyone who knew him after that said he completely changed. He made horrible decisions. He had no pro-social ability whatsoever. He could not get along with anyone. He was just a completely different man. So that's how important the prefrontal cortex is to wisdom and to many other things. But okay, how is wisdom developed? Again, take it with a grain of salt. It's probably different for everybody. But there's research by a woman named Judith Gluck, who is from Austria, and this is a lot of her work. And she says, according to her work, you have to foster the development of a life expertise. So that includes life experience, having good mentors. I think that's one of the most important things in life. I know for me too, even if the mentor is in your life for just a little while, they can make a big impact in your growth. And then having your own curiosity and motivation to learn and to discover new things. And back when I showed you that common wisdom model, the PMC, perspectival model, common wisdom model, the same folks who did the survey, they were also asked questions, how is wisdom developed? And again, this may not be true, but this is what came out of it. Over 40% said, well, it's a direct learning. That includes critical thinking, being mindful, and educating yourself, formal or informal. Next is life experience and from indirect learning. And then learning from life experiences, interventions, and spiritual practices. Social learning, behavioral observations, and seeking advice. And then personal characteristics, which maybe we think has something to do with personality. Openness is one of the big five. So that's just their take on how wisdom is developed. And this is Judith Gluck and Susan Block, and they came up with this. They came up with this more development, wisdom development, and more stands for Mastery, so the ability to manage uncertainty and change and successfully deal with changes and transitions. Being open, having an interest in new perspectives and being non-judgmental. The reflectivity part that we saw before, and having empathy and emotion regulation. So being calm in really stressful situations, and being able to put yourself in another's shoes. And I like how she defined it: attentive to complex emotions of the self and of others. So these personal resources dynamically interact to promote growth and wisdom directly from life experience. And her quote is, "We are not born wise. It must be learned through experience, both positive and negative. Wisdom comes at a cost, but the benefits are priceless."
What does it cost?
If you go through a negative experience in your life,
Okay.
yeah. I'm sure many of you have heard of Erik Erikson. I don't have too much time, so I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. But he came up with these 8 stages of psychosocial development, I think in the 1950s it was. And the last 2 stages of life deal with, first of all, generativity, which is mentorship and giving of yourself, volunteering to help particularly younger generations in life. And so, with Erikson's psychosocial development stages, there are usually 2 conflicting elements. And according to him, you have to overcome one, you have to allow one to win over the other to move through these psychosocial development stages. So the 2 conflicting ones in stage 7 are generativity versus stagnation. So you're either like midlife crisis, life sucks, I'm not dealing with this, is stagnation. Or generativity is, you know what, I'm thinking about my life and what I've done and what I have yet to offer, and I'm going to offer that as best I can. So the virtue out of generativity is caring for others, and action is mentorship. And the final stage of his theory is the 2 conflicting elements are integrity versus despair. Integrity has a lot to do with reflectivity and life review, looking back over your life, and sharing that wisdom that you've learned. Or despair would be, you can use your imagination for that. Okay, I'm just going to go through so we can get through this and we can have questions. Okay, some studies on wisdom and aging. So our friend Dr. Jess Day, who did all the fMRI scans and learned where wisdom lives in our brain, he also used some measurements and to see if wisdom was a protective factor against specifically loneliness. And it was by Dr. Lee, but then Dr. Jesse was the last author, so I always refer to him. They looked at 217 older adults, and what they found was the higher the wisdom score, the highest is 5, the lower the loneliness score on the UCLA loneliness score. And that's a particularly strong negative relationship, negative being when this goes up, this goes down. So perhaps wisdom, and you can think about what we talked about, the ability to handle and manage adversity, the ability to reflect on your life and to use that, mentorship, and even have the ability to have those meaningful relationships. This is something that I did for my master's thesis here at U of A. And so I call it the Life Lesson Project. And what I did was there was a data set that was kind of floating out there, and a friend of mine had done a study a couple years previously. And then her study was they went into an older adult community, and the college students interviewed older adults and simply said, "Tell me about yourself, tell me about your life." That's the only question they asked. They visited these individuals on 3 separate occasions for about an hour each. So each older individual had a 3-hour interview. And then they made a life story for them afterwards and presented it to them. All this to gauge how effective was intergenerational connection. So from that sample, and it was I think 52 older adults. Yeah, 52 older adults. I randomly pulled 5 older adults, 3 females and 2 males. Their mean age was 87. So these are folks that are a little bit older. And that was a total of 15 hours of just natural conversations, mainly with the older adult telling about their life. So what I wanted to do with this, from all the research and literature review that I had done, I had from the most popular, I guess, wisdom characteristics in the literature, I pulled 6 characteristics, which I'll show you in just a minute. And I, first of all, listened to them, and I had another person also listen to them, and we compared. So we had an inter-rater reliability that we were actually finding the same things. Are these people when they talk about their lives, are their life lessons embedded in their conversations? And I found between all 5 subjects, there were 64 life lessons. And of those life lessons, on an emotional valence scale, for the most part, they were negative. They were, death, divorce, suicide, losing a job, different things in life that had happened that were negative. This individual is really interesting, subject 4, because he actually, and I randomly chose these, he did very poorly on a cognitive assessment. So he might have had some type of early stage dementia, and he had no negative. That was fun. Yeah. So these are the 6 characteristics I pulled out of the literature. We've talked a lot about these today: openness, resilience, prosocial behaviors, emotion regulation, being calm, reflectivity, and pragmatic knowledge. So using these, what I did was I took the life lessons, my colleague and I, and again, we rated each other, so we knew we were coming up with the same stuff. And we took the life lessons and we searched for these wisdom characteristics within the life lesson. We wanted to know, well, what's the characteristic that floats to the top the most when these individuals are telling their life story and life lessons? What we found was in this, I guess it's kind of purplish, dark blue, reflectivity is the most, it's the most common. Like there's a lot of variability, as you see, but it's the one that kind of is consistent along all of these individuals. And here's our subject number 4. Yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah, he had high reflectivity and high pragmatic knowledge. Yeah, so it's just very, that's why I said wisdom is so individualistic, but this would suggest that the researchers are right when they say that reflectivity is a really important part of wisdom, being able to reflect back on your life with that meaning making and personal growth. And here's one last study. This was, again, Nick Weststraight from the University of Chicago. In 2018, he looked at 482 midlife adults. So these are not necessarily older adults, but they're not young. And they had them write an autobiographical narrative of a wisdom fostering event, something that happened in your life that you think, taught you a valuable lesson that fostered wisdom. And what they found was that all of these events were very high on fundamentality. So they were very important events in those people's lives. They were culturally non-normative. So those things that pop up and happen that you don't expect, like a sudden death or divorce, as I was saying, or loss of a job. And that they were, there was a high negative emotional valence. So negative, which would, going back to this, a lot of negative events can actually foster wisdom. Okay, so main takeaways for today. Wisdom is uniquely human. It's neurologically located in the prefrontal cortex. It takes reasoning. It takes reflectivity. Wisdom characteristics and transfer are dependent on culture. So whether we live in a collectivist or individualistic society, passing on of knowledge may be evolutionarily and socially beneficial. So we have generativity we talked about, the grandmother hypothesis, and life lessons. And the westernized view sees three main components of wisdom: cognitive, reflective, and compassionate, with reflective being the foundation of the three. But they all have to interact. And then I just said reflectivity is the foundational characteristic. Meaning making and personal growth, particularly from difficult life events, are very important in the development of wisdom through reflectivity. Wisdom may buffer negative age-related or any related circumstances in one's life. And we found, and I didn't go through a study on this, but studies have shown that wisdom is correlated with age. Doesn't necessarily automatically come with age, but it's absolutely correlated with age. And that means through life experience. These are just a couple of questions I kind of threw out here that if you want to think about. We don't have to talk about them, but just think about how can wisdom be reflected in your legacy, and how can wisdom help your aging journey? And here we have Gandhi, who we have on our board. It is unwise to be too sure of one's own wisdom. It is healthy to be reminded that the strongest might weaken and the wisest might err. Thank you. 2 minutes.
Maya will come on and do the online wrap up first, and then we'll move back to in-person questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trish. I just have one question, and I know that you've got a full group in-house as well, so I know they'll have some more. But I just wanted to ask you about research and what you're studying as far as wisdom and aging at the U of A.
Okay. It's funny, when I went to my mentor and he accepted me in his lab, and he said, "You want to study what now?" And I said, "Wisdom." And he's a social psychologist, personality person. He's very well known in the department. And he always tells a story. I didn't know what to think of her and that wisdom, but I am definitely a fan now. So hopefully that will, I actually talked to him about teaching a class on wisdom in the social psychology department, and they're looking at that. So yeah, there's still not a lot of research out there. I do have, I'll do a really quick plug for there is a research going on that I'm doing for my dissertation, and I can put these over here. If you want to email me and be a part of that, it's over Zoom, so you don't have to go anywhere. But yeah, that I would love to. I have a lot of ideas about wisdom and research. Yeah.
Great. So, and if somebody is interested that may be watching at home on your study, it looks like we'll be able to send out that information to them.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Okay, great. So I can share that afterwards. I'll get a copy of it so that we can send it over to you in case anybody is interested. I just want to thank you so much for being here today. That's all the questions I have from the online. So I just want to thank you very much for being here and sharing your wisdom on wisdom. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been really an honor to be here. I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will be back tomorrow. We have another talk, and that will be Oh My Aching Back with Tucson Orthopedic. If you are interested in that talk, that will be on Thursday, October 20th at 3 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.